My name is Torey Williams, and I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, raised in a single-family home. My mom raised me and my sister. We kind of grew up very rough, poor in the hood, if you would. And so we were just raised to, when you're raised in the hood, the whole idea is to make it out, right? And so my goal was to just make it out and make something of myself. And so I was able to play sports at a very young age, and I was pretty athletic, pretty talented. And so I got recruited by a lot of high schools in the area. I was able to go to a private school, and I started playing sports. And so that became, my ticket out. And so my life was just revolved around, sports and, 3-4 teams at a time. My mom would take me to all my games, and the whole idea was, again, you're just going to make it big and make something of yourself. And I ended up walking on college at the University of Missouri. I played football there for a little while. And then when I got to college, though, for most of my high school career, I stayed out of trouble, stayed away from drugs, stayed away from gangs. But when I got to college, that whole college athlete kind of lifestyle began to take over. I began to, drink and party. I joined a fraternity in college, and things just really began to spiral out of control. I found myself missing classes, skipping classes, not just missing them, but skipping classes. And before long, I had been to college. I'd been in college 5 years, and I still hadn't graduated. And so the school was paying for me. They stopped paying for me. And so now it's just time for me to come back home. So I came back to St. Louis. I was about 23 years old, and not really much to do. And I was still just partying and drugging and doing a lot of crazy stuff. And I moved out to Arizona to try to finish up and go to school out there. And when I went out to Arizona, something very amazing really happened to me. The job I worked at, the guy who hired me onto the job, every day he would talk to me about God. He began to talk to me about Jesus. And, he would invite me out to church. And, I hadn't been to church in 10, 15 years. It'd been a long time since we grew up. We didn't really go to church. We weren't really raised in church. Sometimes went to grandmother's church, but he'd invite me to church. And, I finally, after about a year of telling him, yeah, I'm going to go. I finally, one day, he called me on like a Saturday, and he invited me to church. And I don't know why, but I said, yeah, man, I'll go with you. And I went that Sunday. And that first initial Sunday, I sat in church. Pastor Campbell was preaching. He's my pastor. He was preaching. And I remember in that service having like what I now know is a God moment, because God was dealing with me in that service. Wasn't necessarily what he was preaching on, but I just remember thinking, man, my life is never going to be the same. I remember sitting there thinking, if I'm listening to what I'm hearing and it means what it says, I got to make a lot of changes in my life. And so when there was a chance for the altar call, I did not respond to the first altar call, even though I knew I should have. But again, it was just kind of overwhelming. And so I left that service. I continued to come back to church a little bit here and there. I skipped some services. I'd come to church. But I was still living my lifestyle in the world. I was partying 6 nights a week. I was drinking. I wouldn't admit it, but I can admit it now. I was an alcoholic. And so I was just partying, drinking 6 days a week, going to work, kind of going to church. And I did that for like 4 months. And so finally, it just kind of got wearisome. And so I left the church, and things really spiraled downhill. I found myself dealing with drugs. I got arrested. I got put in jail. I had to do 4 months in jail, a lot of things. And I was sitting in, at that period in my life thinking this should never happen to me. Here I am, somebody who went to college, played sports, always kept it clean. But one thing led to another, and there I was. And so, long story short, I knew the answer was Jesus. I knew I needed to get back to church. And one day, I just decided, I'm going to go back to church, and I did. And it was the greatest decision, obviously, I've ever made. I just went back to church. I gave my life to Jesus. And, at that time, I didn't know what I know today, I didn't know I'd be a pastor. I never considered that, but God began to really, really move in my life. It wasn't, I got saved in December 27, 2003. By that January, I was in a Prescott conference, and I went to the Prescott conference just a couple weeks after I got saved. I saw the Thursday night video, and right in that moment, I felt God call me into the ministry. I remember they were playing, the video had a song, Casting Crowns. If we are the body, why aren't his people, why aren't we going? Why aren't we sending? Why aren't we reaching? And I remember standing in the back of that Prescott conference on the Thursday night, and I just started bawling, weeping. And I felt the call of God to go into the ministry. I began to pursue that. And then one year, Pastor Campbell came to me and said, hey, I was a door director in the church. He said, why don't you come on staff and assist me? And at that time, I had a really good job. I was making six figures. And again, how I was raised, this is something you don't walk away from. And so I remember calling my mom, and I said, yeah, I think I'm going to quit my job and be a preacher. And she said, well, can't you preach and keep your job? And I said, well, it doesn't quite work like that. And but I talked to my wife, and in the midst of that, obviously met my wife. Very interesting story. I met my wife, not the place you would typically, but in that period where I was away from God, God was still chasing me, but I went to a bar that I used to always go to, and my wife, Stacia, who's my wife today, she walked in there, and this is very interesting when you're running from God, because I'm in there, and she walks in. I never met her. I begin to talk to her. Within like 5 minutes of the conversation, I said to her, hey, so what's your story? And she said, I don't know why I'm here. I just want a man that serves God. Now, mind you, I'm running from God. And so, so very interesting. That next Sunday is how we end up going to church, and we've been serving God ever since. We went into the ministry, and it's just been great, man. God has given me something I never thought I could have, a family, being a father, raised without your father, me being an alcoholic. I've never had another drink of alcohol since I got saved. These just personal milestones, but I've never said another cuss word. I've never cheated on my wife when I was a notorious womanizer. And so God will show you, and he showed me that he's very real, because there's things in my life that I tried to stop, that I tried to quit time and time again, and I could for some time. But God totally delivered me. And listen, I'm a new creation, a new man. And so I just thank God for his grace and his mercy and his ability to redeem, and the fact that he never gave up on me. God never gave up on me. And when I look back, I can look at different moments and say, man, you know what? That was God trying to redirect my life and get a hold of me. He was a relentless pursuer of me. And I so thank God to be a part of this fellowship that we're a part of. Amen. And just having a family and the mercy of God in my life.